Alright, so very good morning everyone. My name is Yin Shan and today I'm extremely excited to share with you my current research ideas. I hope to convince you of the value of my research and gain valuable feedback on how I can take my ideas further. So, friends. We all have friends. Friendships are part and parcel of the sustenance of our everyday lives. They are the family we choose, a social bond whose role in our lives are not to be belittled. But to what extent have friendships been studied in geography? Friendships appear at the acknowledgement pages of our thesis, but rarely forms the content of what is studied. Given the personal, private nature of friendships, they are deemed less significant of academic-worthy insights. But I believe that friendships can reveal insights into our social worlds and its affective dimensions, offering us a perspective of what it means to be human. Personally, I've always been intrigued as to what sustains these non-kin relationships. Friendships are not to be taken for granted. They require reciprocal commitment and work, investment of emotional labor and time, and perhaps, and this is something geographers are well placed to explore, there is a spatiality to its sustenance. So how do I plan to go about studying friendship? I'm someone who loves to travel, and in the past 1 year, I went on 8 trips with my friends. I had just graduated, and everyone around me seemed to be going on these grad trips. So it got me wondering, what exactly is the significance of the graduation trip? Is it merely a trip taken with close friends, or are there deeper symbolic undercurrents to this ritualistic rite of passage, marking the transition between youthhood and adulthood? I realized that I could turn this curiosity into a research worth investigating, using the grad trip as an empirical lens to critically analyze the social relation of friendship. The next question then is, how can I use this angle to value add to existing theories within my field of tourism geography? To answer this, I will now delineate my tentative conceptual framework in bridging friendship and tourism together, and that is using the conceptual toolkits of authenticity and well-being. The theorization of friendship necessitates us to return to the philosophy of Aristotle's friendships of virtue. He suggests that to perceive a friend is necessarily in a manner to perceive oneself, and to know a friend is in a manner to know oneself. Our friends help us to interpret ourselves. We see ourselves through the mirrors of our friends. Thus, we may come to better understand our self-identities through interaction with friends. That is not to say that our identities are fully formed and self-sufficient, reflected through our friends' interpretation, but that our friends offer us a view of a self that is constantly evolving. There is a saying that we are our most authentic selves when we are with our friends. Authenticity. Now, what does that really mean? This is an interesting question that tourism scholars have been grappling with for decades, and I'll walk you through its development in a nutshell. Tourism is framed by Dean McKennell as man's elusive search for authenticity, having been alienated from modernity's routines and commercialization. The search for objective authenticity is to see the pristine, untouched culture of the other, but this is, however, a search that is futile. We will always encounter a staged authenticity, a performance or representation of culture, one that is socially produced to fit the selective interests of capitalism. Embedded in the original theorizing of the tourist gaze in search of objective authenticity is an inherent Western centricism, the idea that other civilizations exist uncorrupted by Western commodification. The premise is, since everyday life is constructed to be inauthentic, tourism is our only route to fulfillment, a temporary release to see the real. In today's era of post-tourism, all of us are quick to lament that there is no such thing as authenticity since everything is socially constructed. But that brings me to a second school of thought in tourism, one which I want to zoom in for my research. Not objective authenticity, but existential authenticity. Now, this is not a product of tourism research, but is part of a philosophical tradition concerned with what it means to be human, to be happy, and to be oneself. Nina Wang brought this term into tourism, claiming that tourists are now seeking existential authenticity, a means for their identities to be reaffirmed. This is echoed by Cohen. The world of the everyday is devoid of meaning, and tourism makes alienation endurable because one can be his real self on holiday. And again, Steiner and Ratzinger claim that existential authenticity is pursued through tourism, where tourists are free to define themselves, determine their own identity, claiming and exercising freedom to respond to the world in their own way. I think you are starting to see the direction in which I'm taking my research. The missing piece I'm trying to fill here is that friends can help us discover our authentic selves on holiday. There has been a movement to de-exoticize tourism, the idea that tourism is a mundane mobility and not an exotic realm separate from our everyday, but instead an extension of everyday life. Emphasis is placed on sociality, relations between traveling companions. This is often overlooked in tourism theory, which pigeonholes the host-guest relationship as a self-other binary and sees the tourist experience as asocial and individual. This got me thinking, what if authenticity can be found not within exotic others but in familiar others? A quest for authenticity does not necessarily require a search for the remote and primitive. Pons argues that even the most banal, mundane, depthless, and fun aspects of tourism has the potential to facilitate existential authenticity, as tourism is merely one way to dwell in the world. Brown went on to theorize that tourism is not merely a substitute for existential authenticity unachievable in everyday life, but is instead a catalyst offering a reflective space for introspection to face anxiety through a hiatus from the quotidian and removal from routine. But what if we bring with us familiar others from our everyday spaces into a foreign space? Because I do that, we all do that, but why aren't they considered in the equation in the tourism scholarship we see? In discussing family holidays by the beach, Pons called for a re-socialization of tourism theory. And this is exactly where I see my research contributing to the current trajectory in tourism research. There is a gap to be filled in empirical research into the importance of sociality in travel practices. To me, it is not merely what is done, where it is done, but with whom. Current research on youth tourism is limited to gap year backpacking and volunteerism, which again largely focuses on the individual experience. And family tourism, where sociality is key and is only just emerging in the field. So you may be thinking, where is the geography in this? To me, what is at stake here is that the journey is more important than the destination, which seems to decenter space as merely a container for social life to unfold. But then, the space of tourism has always been exceptional, and my research seeks to uncover exactly why and how it allows for this existential authenticity to be triggered and what sets it apart, but also within the mundane and everyday. In dissecting existential authenticity in tourism, I also want to draw links to the concept of well-being, which ties in quite nicely to the narrative that I'm trying to paint. Here, I want to bring in the eudaimonic approach to well-being, which emphasizes personal growth and self-fulfillment, all of which self-identity is a part of. So how does the tourism experience allow for a better understanding of one's self-identity? This is often discussed within the context of slum tourism, volunteerism, and dark tourism, always in relation to an encounter with the other, but never in relation to familiar friends. Constructing and redefining the self is an integral part of well-being, often overlooked. I thus find this conceptual toolkit to be particularly useful because I'm examining youth identities in its process of formation. The grad trip can be likened to a rite of passage consisting of a period of separation, liminality, and incorporation. Thus, I posit that tourism is not merely a liminal space for personal growth and discovery of one's self-identity, disjointed from reality, but one that brings about well-being that can be incorporated back into everyday life. So the following Venn diagram essentially encapsulates the tentative concepts that I will be amalgamating for my research. So this brings me to my 3 research questions. Firstly, I want to understand how friendships are sustained through travel. Here, I deconstruct the significance of the graduation trip and what it does for friendship. Today, travel is almost synonymous with photography and the representation of an idealized self, an idealized reality in line with the tourist gaze. So I hypothesize, could it be that the tourist gaze is moving away from particular sites to foregrounding particular idealized relationships? I want to find out what the shared journey symbolizes, what sets the grad trip apart from friendships practiced in everyday life, and whether there is a particular speciality to how friendships are strengthened. Next, I ask, how does the grad trip help one to discover a more authentic self? What aspects of a multifaceted self are unlocked from being away from the familiar spaces of home and family, especially in the Singaporean context, where many young adults stay with their parents? Is discovering an authentic self something that cannot be done in everyday life? There is again this disjuncture between tourism and the everyday. So I want to understand what it is about traveling companions on grad trips that then co-create the space for tourism that makes it exceptional in nurturing existential authenticity, which can then contribute to tourism knowledge on the concept of authenticity. And lastly, my third question, I ask, how does travel with friends contribute to personal well-being? The graduation trip is one of many trips that can be taken with friends, and in bringing out the sociality at the core of travel, I hope that its findings can be extrapolated to understanding holidays taken with friends at any stage of one's life course, a concept that has come under increasing scrutiny given the renewed attention to mental health. Why is a better understanding of one's self-identity at a stage of transition between youthhood and adulthood pivotal to eudaimonic well-being, and that is understandings of self-fulfillment. I posit that friendship as a support network plays an important role into adulthood long after the trip has ended. So how do I plan to go about answering my research questions? Onto my methodologies, and here's where it gets really interesting for me, something that really excites me about embarking on this project. Feminist methodologies have always inspired me, especially in thinking about the politics of knowledge production, reflecting on my positionality and being reflexive about my authorship and representing the stories of others. I have chosen to weave an autobiographical approach to my writing. Having gone on graduation trips with friends, I believe that my situatedness and embodied experiences will enrich my research through the narration of my personal voice. In addition, I will also conduct focus groups amongst my own circles of friends with whom I have travelled with, as well as with other groups of friends who are planning to embark on their graduation trips this summer. So I recently came across an article from the Geohumanities Journal calling for academics to acknowledge and honour stories as creative methodology to establish a place for stories in the academy and to reconceptualize authorship. What we think of as our voice is actually not ours at all, but given to us by stories which we come across in our everyday lives, which allow us to think, and thus our thoughts are always constitutive with that of others. It is not us who give the other a voice through our research, it is they who give us ours. This idea is very, very exciting to me because I want to unravel my position not only as a budding academic, but also as a friend through my writing. In taking on a humanistic approach to my research, I insert myself into the study and reflect on my own journey in discovering my identity through my travels. As Yi-Fu Tuan said, just as no human life is negligible, so no human life story is negligible and not worth telling. In conclusion, what does my research hope to achieve? My research follows the same vein of thinking that tourism is a means to discover the authentic self. What changes in this equation is the means to get there. Conventional tourism theories would have you believe that the journey is an asocial one, an individual journey. But what I want to introduce to the literature is that the interaction on holiday is what makes the difference. My research aims to better understand the geographical dimensions of how friendship is sustained through travel, thus unraveling how social relations are made through our mobilities. I hope to broaden understandings of travel as a way to reflect inwards on the self through the sustained presence of others. And in doing so, I seek to explain the importance of friendship as a social tie pivotal to the personal development and well-being of young adults in contemporary modernity. So with that, I conclude and thank you very much for your kind attention.
I really appreciate that you made that very easy for non-experts to follow. So thank you. I have a question about authenticity. I appreciate that you gave some of the foundation informational references, but a lot of the references that you showed on the slide were from the 70s, 90s, and early 2000s. Could you give us an idea of where this fits in on the kind of more recent scholarship in tourism geography?
So from what I've read so far, the idea of existential authenticity kind of came in later, from 1999 onwards. And there has been scholars who have been trying to understand this idea of existential authenticity. Is it something that is different from what has been discussed before? Is it something that is unique only to this tourism experience, or is it not? I think I am not super caught up with like everything that has been said on existential authenticity thus far, but I hope that what I presented kind of gives the whole development of what has been said. Yeah. But most recently, the paper that I think was in 2016, they were really calling for more empirical evidence for, the process of how existential authenticity is formed, because a lot of it is just theorizing without so much of the empirical basis for it. Yeah, I hope that answers your question. Yeah, I'll take it in.
Yeah, I enjoyed that. Thanks very much, Jen. So the existential authenticity as a concept, as you know, can sometimes be criticized for being kind of navel-gazing, self-absorbed, but most importantly, apolitical. And it's very much a softer way of thinking about tourism. In your grad trips, have you, in thinking about existential authenticity as a concept, and thinking about the kind of preliminary fieldwork you've done, have you noticed any political edges to existential authenticity, or are you in agreement that this is very much a softer, more self-reflective version of authenticity?
I think that's also a concern that I have for this research that I'm embarking on, whether it's too much self-absorbed, as you've said, and whether there is a broader, like societal implication for, the findings that I might eventually find. Yeah, not so much. I do not really see the political aspect of it. A lot of it's about just very much reflecting on the self, and that kind of shows in the methodologies as well, which tries to bring out the very like human-based approach.
Yeah, sort of related to that, I came in at the time when you were talking about your own grad trip. Did you say you went for 8 in a year or something like that?
Yeah.
But I went on a trip when I graduated, but I did not go with friends. So what I was struck was how grad trips are kind of, I don't know whether this is fair to say, it's a recent phenomenon, and it comes with its own kind of structural elements, right? And I was wondering about the politics of it as well. Like when people go on a grad trip, there is a pre-formed by industry and by different kinds of tourism agents to shape a particular package. And I was wondering how you would separate that from the self and how people perform self in that context.
It's not false identity.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and there are different kinds of grad trips. Some people go
By themselves.
Yeah, okay. Go for food. Some people go to Iceland, and there are different kinds, and I think that's class.
Yeah, I think there's an inherent like class privilege in terms of who gets to go, where they go, what they do, and whether people start comparing it, given how there's this representation of the idealized kind of friendship on social media, right? So that could be one angle to kind of look at how there might be inequalities embedded in this very egalitarian idea that everyone can go on this journey of self-fulfillment, but is everyone equally able to go? Yeah, thank you for the comment.
Can I just one last one? It's actually quite important.
Well, actually, it's time to. Unfortunately, I have to put my foot down. We'll like to continue with Chanika's presentation, but if you have any additional questions. So, any additional questions can be asked during the tea break.
Tea break, alright.
Okay, thank you.